How are you? Welcome to Critical Moves of Telesur. The world had already been having pandemics before COVID-19. Just to mention two, extreme poverty and hunger. How many millions of people are in the numbers under these two categories? What is the vaccine that is needed to overcome them? What are the relationships between the economic level and the poverty? Where could the balance tip in this context of COVID-19? This is what we're going to be analyzing today. Let's begin. Let's listen statements of the numbers of the international organisms about the increase of extreme poverty in the people that are going to be tend to be more hunger stricken. What we're faced now is to a double pandemic. One, mega hunger strikes, and they're on the board. Before COVID came, we had 135 million people on border of hunger. And of the 821 million people that already have chronic hunger, these are people that if they don't receive emergency help, they will just die. According to the World Health Organization, there are 100,000 people of these that only receive food from us. While we're handling the pandemic of COVID-19, we're on the verge of a pandemic of hunger. My conversations with world leaders before said that in 2020 we'll have the worst humanitarian crisis ever, the Second World War, for many reasons. We must be prepared for an increase of the conflicts, hunger, poverty, diseases. While the economies are decreasing, the exportations are coming down, and all of the health system are being submitted to great pressure. This economic recession may lead to a pandemic of hunger for millions of people. In many places, the impact of the national measures and the global recession may be even worse than the impact of the disease. We have to combat the disease, but it won't be the only battle that we will be facing. A vaccine against the COVID is basic, but it will not save the kid who is dying of hunger if we don't act fast. If we don't do this emergently, we will have to go backwards in all of our increases. We need $6.7 billion to stop the spreading the virus. The humanitarian help is not just imperative, it's a need to combat the virus. If COVID-19 causes effects in the poorest people, we are all at risk. So we need everybody's help. This was the General Secretary of United Nations, Antonio Guterres, speaking of the context of COVID-19. We also bring a report from BBC. It says the impact of coronavirus in the United States, the long and surprising lines in the food banks in the most richest country of the world. It is the most prosperous country in the world, but the reality has shown that with the expansion of COVID-19, the long lines has been formed where the food is delivered. This sanitary crisis, which is now the epicenter of COVID-19, throws unresting numbers. It's more than 1 million people infected, more than 60,000 deaths, and more than 30 million people that are employed. In this context, food banks are working to the double so they can reach the major number of people, so they can do it while maintaining the distance. Chicago, Detroit, Miami are now always seeing long lines of people that are waiting to receive boxes of basic food. This article is much more extent. It's from May 1st in BBC London. What is Xinhua? This is the Chinese agency. It says the Venezuelan scholar food program is still active. In the capital of Venezuela, there are like 500 lunches a day that feed the people, the students and their families. and the numbers are going up in all of the schools. It's not only about education, but now about food too. Every family is one school, so everybody helps out. This is what Mr. Viva says. He's the delegate for the region. Meanwhile, the teacher, Estelina Flores, has said that together with the communities, we are feeding both the students as well as the people of the community. For the personnel who works in this school from Monday to Friday, the government of Caracas has begun fast tests to detect COVID-19. This is a measure that everybody thanks for. Ever since the government has declared the quarantine, education has continued through a virtual system. This program bets on long-distance education with the active work of the family. So let's see how this compares to the United States. In Venezuela, it's the state authority to keep up with the food systems. Let me invite you to read a book that's called Take Caring of the Land, Sustainable Measures to Go into the 21st Century. This is of Jorge Richman, and it's published in 2005. Skimming this book, it says, probably ever since the Industrial Revolution, when it was seen that all of the knowledge was useful for agronomy, because before agronomy was just based on old-fashioned principles. The ethic has now lost any type of values. And even though the economic values don't appear in the basic knowledge, however, it does influence everything. With this, science is now no longer neutral. The security of the food supply for those who live in industrial countries is not threatened by the mass people that are hungry in the planet, but by the food companies that make this massive food hunger as a standard. The consolidation of the only world market will allow control over the phases of production and commercialization, and it will stop the hunger on a worldwide scale. The food companies don't only perpetrate the hunger in the world, but they are very cruel with the environment. This relationship will only stop when the social relationships are different. It's not only of distributing food, but it's distributing the control over the production. The only way out, faced with this limitation, is the ecological agriculture. These are some of the ideas that are stated by Jorge Reichman. It's important to recall the context of the Millennium Statements of United Nations. In September of 2000, during United Nations meeting with leaders of state, 189 countries signed the Declaration of the Millennium that ratifies the Charter of United Nations as one of the bases that is basic to have a more prosperous and just world. All of the countries were going to work together to eliminate poverty by 2015, and there were some objectives of development of the millennium that were going to fight poverty in many dimensions. This is the stop environmental degradation, violence, aggression, hunger. They also include 8 objectives, 60 indicators that were going to be used, and it was supposed to. All of the objectives were supposed to be reached by 2020. One was eradicate poverty and hunger. For that, everybody was supposed to have decent work. 2, to have universal elementary education. All of the children could end an elementary cycle of education. 3, gender equality, through eradicating any type of inequality of the woman in all levels. 4, to reduce child and infant mortality. This would be to cut in half the mortality. 6, to improve all of the access to maternity health. 6, to combat high-risk diseases like AIDS and others, and to have access to all types of treatments. 7, to ensure environment sustainability and reduce to half the people that don't have access to clean water. 8, to foment a world alliance for development, to have open financial opportunities that do not discriminate against anybody. Thus, there would be a reduction of poverty, and to help the least favored countries. Let's update information. Let's go to Sao Paulo, Brazil, with Nacho, our correspondent. Hello. In fact, the declarations of the Food Organization, Mr. Leslie, have been concerning for Brazil, because first of all, they say that there's going to be a humanitarian crisis, the worst ever since World War II. And in Brazil, things are even worse, because there are criticism to the policies of the government of Brazil. Right now, the combat to the advance of coronavirus has not been efficient. There are 135 million people that have hunger, and 130 million people all around the world on the board that are weak because they don't have enough food. And this is a consequence of lack of food. And in Brazil, Panorama that is getting even worse, because if Brazil had been up until 2014 a referent on how well they did to combat hunger, things are totally different now, because we're on the end of the list. According to ActionAid in Brazil, Brazil is back to the numbers of poverty. They're inferior of 12 years before. So the path that had already been walked. And now with the arrival of coronavirus, this is going to make these problems even worse. A problem that must be addressed is that the Department of Investigation of Economy in Sao Paulo has said that the support that the government has given to the workers, the most vulnerable workers, ever since the coronavirus has come, is 60% of what should be considered a minimum wage. So these measures have led the people to break the barriers and take to the streets, because they need money to survive. And they make the crisis due to hunger even worse. To close, this new dispute for the access to food has two-tiered. One, the agro business, those who produce for exportation, and on the other hand, the small agriculture production, who are in charge of 60% of what is consumed in the country. So now we need to ensure the people to have all of the nutrients they need. Let's not forget that 70% of the distribution of the food is up to the hands of small producers. So there is a clear dispute between two sectors. One that concentrates lands and it uses biological organisms that are modified, and the other ones that are the small producers, who also have difficulties now. Thank you very much, Nacho. Now we heard that in Brazil, the Minister of Health has stepped down. Let's mark our first pause. Remember that we have the question of the day, where you can participate with us with our website. It says the pandemic of COVID-19 has made us reflect on other pandemics like extreme poverty and the direct consequences of hunger. how can we eradicate this? What is the solution? We'll be right back.
Telesur English presents a weekly program to discuss the political, economic and social issues affecting the Caribbean community. We'll challenge stereotypes and unpack the diversity of the region through the analysis of unique cultures, religions and art. We Caribbean. Wednesdays. Only on Telesur.
Eight 821 million people go to sleep hungry everywhere in the world with chronic hunger. There's 135 million people that are at critic hunger. This means that 135 million people on the planet are walking to annihilation. The World Food Organization has shown that 130 million people additionally could be pushed to extreme hunger in 2020. This is 265 million people. We could be analyzing hunger in 36 countries. In fact, 10 of these countries, we have over 1 million people per country that are on the verge of death. According to the United Nations numbers and the World Food Organization, 135 million people are suffering of hunger. Let's see the panorama and the causes that could become even worse due to the pandemic. The director of the World Food Organization, David Beasley, has alerted that the number of people that are in chronic hunger could duplicate the numbers. In 2019, 135 million people in over 55 countries went through food insecurity. The cause of this are in the lack of food, because the climate change, speculation, and war also has an influence. The latest report shows that 97 people of those who had food insecurity last year were located in countries that have armed conflicts. The increase of temperatures also make the production cycle difficult and different. And this makes it that people have to migrate to other places. According to the World Food Organization, there are millions of people that have been affected. And they said that they are now climatic refugees. With the pandemic, there is a consequence of a new pandemic, which is now hunger. Now, the director says that those who are hungry could go up to 265 million due to the economic crisis caused by the pandemic of COVID-19. Additionally, the World Food Organization has requested the Security Council to fight poverty and to ask a ceasefire to stop the armed conflicts that make a greater strain on humanity. Let's begin the analysis in our critical moves. From Chile, we have an investigator, and from Argentina, Paola Klachkos. She is a scholar from universities, and she is part of the Network in Defense of Humanity. I would like to thank you both for being here. I would like to start with the lady. If up until the arrival of the pandemic, the topic of food security was on the table of many international organisms, now it's an urgency to solve. In fact, that is true. Well, first of all, good morning. It's so nice to be with you, with all of your audience. Well, in fact, with these days, we see how the problem of hunger is now becoming even more profound. And to use the words of the World Food Program, we're seeing a humanitarian catastrophe. But I ask myself, with this fatality of humanity, humanity wasn't ready for this? I mean, at least could we prevent part of this? Or to be better, have a better standing of what is going on now. And due to the conditions that we are going through, many scientists are announcing that this is going to be a fourth technological revolution. Nevertheless, we see that our political leaders, above all, those who believe that they're the owners of the world, like United States, they think that this is a fatality and that there's nothing we can do. So what we have to do is let those who have to die just die. So we remember that Malthus proposed this like a fatality, like a natural law, saying that what happened during the first economic revolution, where capitalism that by then was already unfair, that is based on exploiting the majorities so a few could live better in the world. And what shows us is how the numbers reveal this. So 1% of humanity has more than doubles of almost 7 billion people. This means that 1 billion has more than the 7 billion that are on the other side. So those people that were too many in the world, because the demographic growth would be progressive, while the increase of the production would have a mathematical progression. So the capitalism knew how to eliminate many people during the first two wars. Now we are going through the fourth economic revolution. Just last year, to speak about the irrationality of the world, the military expenses just in the US during 2019, it was over $750 billion. And let's not even speak about technology. However, now we are on the doors of these catastrophes like hunger. What I'm trying to say with all of this is that humanity, we are in the condition to reorient all of our objectives and all our productive forces so we wouldn't have to go through hunger, even though this pandemic is going on. And this becomes even worse because of the concentration that was already a tendency in this imperialistic reality, but now is on a worldwide scale that leads us to a huge irrationality. Let's see the numbers of Oxfam that says that the central industry that we need to solve the calamities of the humanity. Let's just speak of the main ones, which is food, agro-industry, and the pharmaceutical and laboratories. The level of concentration in 8 or 9 huge companies that dispute the world itself are really putting in front of them the priorities they have and to keep on taking advantage of this catastrophe so they can concentrate their richness. And of course, what of the people say, what all of the world leaders say, well, it's a catastrophe as if it was a biblical thing, which is not. Doctor, let's go to our other guest. You have given us really important ideas in your first part of the dissertation. Ideas which I want to share with Benjamin, who's a sociologist. How do you understand the fact that the world is so proud of going to the fourth industrial revolution? There are some that say that we are at the doors of the fifth industrial revolution, when we still see huge numbers of poverty and extreme poverty. Well, as it's been said, far from going to a fourth industrial revolution in terms of what that means in the common sense, which would be that there would be economic increase, because you would think that with a better economic level, there would be a reduction of hunger and poverty. Nevertheless, what we see at a worldwide scale is that they're becoming even stronger. This structure of inequality has grown. It has grown even stronger. And we see that it's not only among country to country, but we see that within every country there are regions that have not been able to develop, and that that the distribution and circulation of the production isn't equal, and the patterns of consumption are not equal either. Now we see how there's a number of nations that are at a food risk that is alarming, just like the World Food Program has said. So it's alarming that 135 million people are at extreme hunger. And to this you can add that there is a similar number ever since this pandemic. So we're speaking of duplicating the number of people that are extreme hunger. And what is very relevant is that from 2015 already, according to the World Food Program, there has been a tendency of the food reduction, of a hunger reduction. From this point of view, far from being a natural tendency, the reduction of hunger, we see how just recently capitalist system has increased hunger. And in the midst of this, the COVID strikes us, and now things are even worse. And now we see that there is a concern of how the food chain is able to supply what is needed by everybody in this sense. The World Food Program alerts that there are like 2 billion people, that is almost like a fourth of the world, that are at food risk, because they show a level of insecurity that could be moderate or severe. It is spoken of 700 million people that have a high level of food insecurity. This means that the distribution, food chains, the way that the food is being produced in the recent decades is a way that puts at risk a large number of the population. This not only in poor countries, but also an important increase in food security. This in several countries, in countries that are even thought that are well-to-do, which is not true. Benjamin, how would you say that hunger and extreme poverty has migrated from poor countries to a medium class country where you would think that this would not be possible to think. Let me go back to Dr. Paula. You were talking about the existence of a couple of initiatives that are fundamental for these times of the pandemic. Could you mention some? I think we lost communication with the doctor. Let's go back to Benjamin Saez. He's an investigator and sociologist. Well, practically I had interrupted you, but could you keep underserting of this idea that is very important to analyze now with the COVID-19, and it's about the expansion of this poverty and hunger from poor countries to minimum wage to medium economy countries. So yes, the most important element is the capacity of autonomy that each country has food-wise. So this is the effect of the agro-industry, of the exportation, and basically of a limited amount of resources. So these are elements that go through with the risk that they might have in reducing their indicators of food capacity for their people. In the sense, the countries that depend merely on importation of food are countries that are now in a complex situation. And we see with this pandemic how the prices have gone up, and even the currencies have gone up, and they also have an influence on restrictions that have been imposed by several countries. And well, as I said before, this is having consequences on those who import food, and of course, obviously, on those who export, because it has a co-relationship. So in this sense, Mexico, Venezuela, and the region are countries on which there is an alert because they import a lot of food. As we spoke of alternatives, so we can have food sovereignty. So that is it's fundamental. Thank you, Benjamin. Let's go to Dr. Paula. Doctor, you spoke of the existence of initiatives that are pivotal now. Could you tell us a couple of them? Well, confronted with this attitude that is totally selfish of the multinationals that have all of their armies all through the world with the support of the capitalist world. With this, we have several initiatives of solidarity, like the ones that have been developed by the movement of rural land workers in Brazil, in the sense of initiatives like the UTT, that's the Union of Workers of the Land. And this week in Argentina, they gave away 6,000 kilos of vegetables in soup markets, and these are based on small landowners, and they have a network. And even the government of Argentina, we know that this organization is very much in touch with the government, because one of the one of the leaders works for the government, and they regulate the prices of food. So these are initiatives that we have to copy, but we also need of resources and support of the national countries. This is why it's so important to defend from the attacks of these multinationals and the oligarchies that we know that in Latin America were always based on the concentrated property of land. And with them, the multinationals are also part of them. Let's not forget that we are totally subordinate to these companies because we offer them basic raw resources. And of course, the oligarchies pretend to keep on doing so. But in some countries, like the progressive governments, like the case of Argentina, we see in Mexico too, the revolutionary governments of Venezuela, Nicaragua, Cuba, where it is important to reinforce these popular governments so these initiatives can grow stronger from the bottom and from the top. These are the ones that can help us with the veracity of the multinationals. And this is only the only thing that's going to help us with this biblical catastrophe. Now we have to put on the backs the responsibility of providing people with food and medicines. However, we see that there's going to be a huge dispute when the vaccine is discovered, and this will be only covered for people with money. Or maybe there are different types of vaccines, for poor people, for rich people. And we can't make no differences because rich or poor, they all have the same value. This is not a human fatality. There is an insistence of a discussion of the role of the government, and on the contrary, the government has not backed down on the presence, but we see that the military expenses have gone up. And we see how the military states that are representative of these big capitals make a monopoly and concentrate all the richness. However, we have to change things so the government represent popular initiatives. And let me finish with this great example of the doctors in Cuba. This country that exports health. So we see how the Network for Defense of Humanity, we are supporting the candidacy for the Nobel Peace Prize to the medical brigade of Cuba. Well, we should have a special program for just this. Thank you very much, Benjamin, for your words. Thank you very much. See you next time. Let's go to our pause. Or do we have another material? A map? Yes? Okay, yes, a map that we owed the people of Jugada Crítica. Let's see how the numbers go by regions. Extreme poverty in the world, according to the World Food Program. 135 million people in the world have food crisis, while 130 million will be on the verge of death because of the pandemic of COVID-19. In 2019, the World Food Program and the Development Program published a report on the level of poverty. These are the numbers. In Africa, 84.5% of the poor people live on the south of the Sahara. South Sudan and Niger have a level of poverty of 91.9%, and Niger 90.5%, compared to 14.9% of Gabon and 6.3% of South Africa. In Asia, we can speak of countries like Afghanistan with 55.9 of poverty, and Maldives where they have a 0.8%, while in the Middle Pacific Asia, 546 million live in poverty. Of these, 200 million live in extreme poverty. In America, according to the ICLAC, the number of poor people in the region is 185 million, and they would pass to 220 million due to the COVID-19. The people who live in extreme poverty will increase from 67.4 million to 90 million. In Europe, according to Eurostat, 113 million people are at risk of poverty. Their income is 60% less than the average of the people who live in their country. This means that 22.5% of the population of the European Union, this is 1 in 4. According to United Nations, Spain is the most affected country with 26.1%. Most of the population have had difficulties to reach to the end of the month of food. Children are also mostly affected. According to the report, Australia is also affected because 13.2 lives under the poverty level. This is 739,000 children. Why did we want to show you this map? So you could see that that the poverty is not only for Latin America. Don't forget to participate in our question of the day. In the context of COVID-19, we reflect about other pandemics like extreme poverty and the consequence, which is hunger. Is it so hard to eradicate? Where is the solution to this? Participate with us. We'll be right back.
A review of the world news that investigates, incites analysis, and induces criticism, because every event has a context.
Pusimos el punto en la I.
Dot in the eye. Saturdays, only on Telesur.
The wide breach between the opportunity of social security is now bigger between the poverty and the people who have money. The World Organization says that we live in a richer country, but more unequal because the economic rights are denied to many people. The organism alerts that a fourth number of the world is in extreme poverty, which shows that there is a huge failure in the neo-capitalist countries. Many people live with less than $125 a day, and they have no basic services, just like the United Nations program says. But the economic aspect has a consequence of the neoliberal laws, because this makes the difference even bigger. The inequality grows because 10% of the richer earns 40% of all of the money in Latin America. One of the structural programs is the inequality caused by governments of neoliberal tendency. CEPAL has reflected in 246 Latin American people live in extreme poverty, and this organism has asked to eradicate the phenomenon and decrease the inequality. This situation has caused unrest in the region between those who have major difficulty to education, health, or pension system. ever since last year. Population of Colombia, Chile, Ecuador, and Haiti have taken to the streets in rejection to the increase of poverty and inattention to the inequalities. Let's see other concepts that we're going to analyze. Let's speak with Christian Rodriguez. He is a sociologist in charge for United Nations and La France en Suisse. Hello, Christian. How are you? Thank you very much for having us. Thank you very much. Christian, we are concerned about these pandemics that are parallel to the COVID-19, to which up until now, everything seems that they have not received the proper attention. Yes, well, the COVID has come to make it even worse, this inexplicable and unreliable insecurity, food insecurity. We heard the numbers that are terrible. These are millions of people. And of course, COVID-19, what it has done is make it worse, this crisis. And this is, the inequality is terrible. And this will appear with a lot of strength. In fact, in Europe, we see that that several countries, the poverty has increased. There are many sectors here near Paris are suffering hunger. So, how can we confront in this inequality, in this chain of competition? The only vaccine of hunger and COVID is to have complete solidarity. Those who have more have to give more to those who have less. And therefore, that has to do with who's going to pay for this cost and who pays. This is a very important concept. If we see it like this, in a cold way, we could think that, oh, well, solidarity in the hands of who? Of organizations that are charitable or state organizations? Who's going to put the end to this? We think that it's fundamental that the United Nations has to lead this. United Nations has to lead this process. In fact, there is an initiative that is very strong. We have just seen like 150 world leaders that support the vaccine, that everything has to do with the supplies, has to be of easy access. But of course, it's not anybody, but we know who are the richest one. We know who are the millionaires in the world. We know that we have to put a larger tax to the most rich. Of course, there is a case of sanitary emergency due to the COVID. We think that all of the chain of distribution of food, of water, and the discourse of this thing says, wash your hands. But there are countries where people cannot do that. They have no privilege to do that. The fact of eating or have social distancing is not possible. So it's urgent to knock on the doors of those who have more. Thank you very much, Christian, for your reflection of the people of Critical Moves. Thank you. See you next time. Christian Rodriguez was with us. Let's go to conclusions. To transform agriculture in the production of food, transform the social relationship, empowering of those less fortunate, to redistribute the economy or just redistribute the control. It's important to find a vaccine for COVID-19, but it's also important to find a vaccine against hunger and poverty. There are some ways, but we need will, political will to do so. Progressive countries have been able to do so. A human being has to be above everything. This is all for today. Thank you.
English presents a weekly program to discuss the political, economic,